There are friendships the world watches from a distance, friendships captured in photographs, documented in tabloids, and discussed in hushed tones at dinner tables across the globe. And then there are the friendships that live in the space between public appearances, in phone calls made at midnight, in tears shed without cameras, in laughter shared over nothing at all. The friendship between Elton John and Princess Diana was both. It was spectacle and it was sanctuary. It was one of the most observed relationships of the 20th century, and yet, for decades, the deepest truths about it remained locked away inside the heart of one man who had promised himself he would protect her memory at all costs. Now, after years of carefully chosen words and diplomatic silences, Elton John has finally begun to speak. Not in fragments. Not in rehearsed sound bites. But in the full, complicated, painful truth of what it meant to love someone like Diana, to lose her, and to carry that loss into every room he has walked into since the summer of 1997. To understand what Elton John has confessed, you must first understand how two people from such wildly different worlds ever found each other at all. Elton John, by the early 1980s, was already a phenomenon. He had sold tens of millions of records. He had performed on stages that shook with the weight of his audiences. He wore costumes that defied description and lived a life that most people could only imagine. He was loud, brilliant, excessive, and deeply, privately lonely. Diana Spencer, in 1981, was on the verge of becoming the most scrutinized woman on the planet. She was young, barely into her 20s, and she was about to marry into an institution that had very little room for the kind of warmth and emotional openness that defined her. She was stepping into a gilded cage, and almost everyone around her was either too intimidated or too invested to acknowledge that fact. When the two of them met at a royal social gathering in the early 1980s, something clicked almost immediately. According to Elton's own recollections shared across multiple interviews and within the pages of his autobiography, Diana had a social ease that was entirely natural, entirely unforced, and entirely unlike anything he had encountered in the rarefied circles they both moved through. She could walk into a room full of powerful strangers and within minutes make every single one of them feel as though they were the most important person she had ever met. She was funny in a way that surprised people. She was mischievous. She was real. For Elton, who had spent years performing a version of himself for public consumption while the private man behind the rhinestones quietly suffered, Diana's authenticity was like oxygen. They began to talk. They began to laugh. And without either of them fully planning it, they began to trust each other in a way that neither of them trusted easily. What Elton has confessed in recent years, with the kind of clarity that only comes with age and hard-won perspective, is that the foundation of his friendship with Diana was not glamour or status or mutual fame. It was something far simpler and far more fragile. It was the recognition of shared pain. Elton John spent much of the 1980s fighting battles that the public only saw the surface of. His addiction to alcohol and drugs was spiraling. His relationships were complicated. His sense of self-worth, buried beneath decades of performance and applause, was fractured in ways that no amount of sold-out concerts could repair. He was one of the most famous human beings alive, and he was also, in many of the moments that mattered most, deeply unhappy. Diana's unhappiness took a different shape but came from a similarly isolating place. Her marriage to Prince Charles, which had been presented to the world as a fairy tale, was in reality a quiet tragedy. The warmth she offered so naturally to everyone she met was not being returned at home. She struggled with her mental health, with her sense of identity, with the crushing weight of public expectation laid on top of private heartbreak. She has spoken, in her own words, about the darkness of those years. And Elton, who knew darkness himself, understood exactly what she was not saying. That understanding, unspoken, instinctive, and mutual, was the real foundation of everything they built together. He has said that he never needed to explain himself to her. She never needed to explain herself to him. They simply knew. And in a world where both of them were constantly being misread, misquoted, and misunderstood, that kind of knowing was extraordinarily rare. Through the 1980s and into the 1990s, their friendship became one of the defining relationships in both of their public and private lives. They appeared together at charity events, at galas, at concerts and fundraisers. To the outside world, they were a glamorous pairing, the rock star and the princess, an unlikely combination that somehow made perfect sense. But Elton has been clear, in the confessions he has made in recent years, that what the cameras captured was only the outermost layer. What mattered most happened away from the flashbulbs. It happened in private dinners where Diana would dissolve into laughter at Elton's stories. It happened in conversations where she would speak honestly about the loneliness of palace life and he would speak honestly about the terror of being sober for the first time in years. It happened in the genuine, unglamorous work of two people choosing, over and over again, to show up for each other. Their shared commitment to AIDS awareness during the height of the epidemic was not a publicity exercise. Elton has been emphatic about this. Diana's decision to sit with patients, to hold their hands, to treat them with visible human dignity at a time when the disease was surrounded by fear and stigma, that was not calculated. It was who she was. And it was, Elton has said, one of the things about her that he admired most deeply. She used her position not as a shield but as a tool, wielding it in service of people who had been forgotten by almost everyone else with power. He has spoken about watching her in those rooms, those hospital wards and hospices where they worked together, and seeing something that no camera could fully capture. A complete absence of self-consciousness. A total, undivided presence with whoever was in front of her. He has said that she taught him things about compassion that he carries with him still. But Elton John's confessions are not only about love and admiration. He has also spoken with unflinching honesty about the rupture, the painful falling out that separated them in the final years of Diana's life and that he has described as one of his deepest regrets. In 1996, Elton was involved in a charity publishing project, a coffee table book celebrating rock photography with proceeds directed toward AIDS research. He had asked Diana to contribute a foreword, and she had agreed. For him, it was not a small thing. Her name on that project was a statement, a continuation of the advocacy work they had shared for years. He was moved by her willingness to be part of it. Then, without warning, she withdrew. The explanation that reached him was that Palace advisors had objected to some of the imagery in the book and had pressured her to distance herself from the project. The letter he received was polite but cold. Formal in a way that felt like an erasure of everything they had been to each other. Elton has admitted that he reacted badly. He was hurt, and he expressed that hurt in a way that was not gentle. Diana, who was at that moment navigating the collapse of her marriage, the loss of her royal title, and the relentless pressure of palace life and media attention, responded in kind. Their exchange was sharp. After it, there was silence. For nearly a year, they did not speak. And what Elton has confessed, with a rawness that is still evident whenever he speaks about it, is that he has never fully forgiven himself for those months. Not because he was entirely wrong to feel hurt. But because he knew, even then, how precarious her world was. He knew the forces that surrounded her. He knew that her decision may not have been entirely her own. And instead of reaching toward her with that understanding, he let pride take the wheel. He has said simply, in words that carry the weight of everything he now knows, he should have called her. He didn't. And then it was too late. The crack in the silence came in July of 1997, when the death of their mutual friend, fashion designer Gianni Versace, brought them both to Milan for his funeral. Grief has a way of dissolving the walls that pride builds. Diana approached Elton at the service. She reached for his hand. She told him the falling out had been silly and that she wanted them to be friends again. Elton has spoken about that moment with enormous tenderness. He has described the particular quality of Diana's grace in that moment, the courage it takes to be the one who extends the hand first, especially when you are carrying as much as she was carrying at that time. They reconciled. They made plans to see each other. They laughed together again, briefly and beautifully, in the shadow of another loss. 6 weeks later, she was gone when the Spencer family asked Elton to perform at Diana's funeral at Westminster Abbey on September 6, 1997, he said yes without hesitation. With his longtime collaborator Bernie Taupin, he reworked the lyrics of Candle in the Wind, originally written years earlier as a tribute to Marilyn Monroe, into a farewell for Diana. The new version was heard by an estimated 2.5 billion people worldwide. The recording became one of the best-selling singles in music history. And Elton has confessed that he has never been able to feel anything close to pride about that. The success of the song, the records it broke, the cultural moment it represented, none of it felt like an achievement to him. It felt like evidence of a loss too large to measure. He has said that he cannot listen to it. He has said that celebrating it would feel obscene. It was not a song. It was a goodbye that he was not ready to say that in the years since Diana's death, Elton John has spoken about her with increasing openness. He has spoken out in defense of her sons when he has felt they were being treated unfairly by the same forces of media pressure that contributed to their mother's death. He has maintained his connection to her legacy through his charity work and through the private relationships he has preserved with the people who loved her. But the confession that perhaps matters most is the one he keeps returning to, the one about the year of silence and the phone call he never made. He has said that Diana's death taught him that pride is a form of cowardice. That the unwillingness to be the first one to say sorry is just fear wearing a more dignified costume. That life, as he has put it plainly, is simply too short for that kind of stubbornness. Their friendship was built in laughter, tested by pride, nearly broken by silence, and then restored, just barely, in the grief of a Milan church. It was immortalized in a song that its singer wishes had never needed to exist. And it left behind a man who still, decades later, pauses sometimes in the middle of music and remembers a woman who made every room she walked into feel warmer simply by being herself. Elton John has broken his silence. And what he has told the world is not really about fame or royalty or even friendship. It is about what happens when we love people imperfectly, when we waste time on pride instead of connection, and what we are left carrying when the chance to do better is taken from us too soon. Diana deserved more time. Elton knows that. And he has made peace, slowly and imperfectly, with the truth that she also deserved a phone call he never made. That is the confession that matters. That is the one that will outlast everything else.